Hey everyone. Thanks so much for having me here today. My name is Mariah Leach, and I'm here in my kids' playroom to talk to you today about pregnancy and parenting with arthritis. I've personally been living with rheumatoid arthritis since I was 25 years old, and today I have three kids. My boys are 10 and 8, and my daughter just turned 5. And all three of my pregnancies took place after my RA diagnosis. When I first started considering getting pregnant, I really struggled to find the resources and support that I needed to manage my chronic illness in the process. So I created Mamas Facing Forward because I wanted other women with arthritis to have much easier access to resources and support. I wanted to make the information that does exist a lot easier to find. I wanted to work towards creating resources where they're missing. And maybe most importantly, I wanted to connect moms and moms to be who understand this really unique parenting challenge so that they can support each other. As a quick side note, I do focus primarily on supporting moms, and that's just because that's my own lived experience. But I would really love to find some dads to team up with to offer some more well rounded parenting support. So if you're a dad listening today, please do reach out to me. I want to start by mentioning these resources right up front because pregnancy and parenting with arthritis is a huge topic with so many different things to consider, and there's just no way I can cover it all in 20 minutes. So for today, I'm going to stick with the best overall tips that I have, but please consider these resources if you want more support. Today, Mamas Facing Forward is a private Facebook group with thousands of women from all over the world. It's open to moms and moms to be with any type of chronic illness, but the majority of the members are living with some form of arthritis since the group grows mostly through word of mouth. So if you request to join, please make sure you answer all the screening questions and proactively agree to our group rules. I try really hard to keep the group as safe and supportive as possible. We also have a website full of resources that focus specifically on pregnancy and parenting with chronic illness, and that is mamasfacingforward.com. So let's jump right in. When it comes to planning a pregnancy while living with arthritis, one question that comes up for nearly everyone is medications, because so many of us rely on medications to keep our arthritis under control. Now, I need to point out here that I'm not a doctor. This is a topic that you will need to carefully discuss with your own doctor. But based on my own experience and what I've learned from so many other moms living with chronic illness, I think these are the most important considerations when it comes to medications and pregnancy. First, it's important to know that some medications used to treat arthritis are completely unsafe for pregnancy. One common example of this is methotrexate. Methotrexate is prescribed to purposely terminate ectopic pregnancies, which obviously means it's not safe for a desired pregnancy either. So before you even try to conceive, I recommend sitting down with your doctor and discussing all of your current medications to see if there are any that you might need to change in advance. Second, you have to remember to balance the equation on both sides. I know that it's scary to consider exposing a developing baby to any sort of medication, but before we discuss those risks, I want to make sure the flip side of the equation is perfectly clear. Because if the question were, do I expose my developing baby to medication or not, the answer would be obviously not. But for people living with inflammatory arthritis, that's not really the question, is it? For most of us, the question is actually, do I risk exposing my developing baby to medication, or do I risk exposing my developing baby to uncontrolled inflammation in my body? And I think it's super important to understand that both sides of this equation can be dangerous for you and your baby. And there are many studies that show that pregnancy outcomes for moms and babies turn out better when your disease activity is kept under control. So there is data that shows many arthritis medications are safe for pregnancy, and this data continues to improve all the time. My own experience demonstrates this point. With my first pregnancy nearly 12 years ago, there just wasn't enough data about the safety of medications during pregnancy. At the time, my doctors told me to stop taking all of my meds. And as a result, I had an unmedicated pregnancy, I had a terrible postpartum flare, and I was advised to stop breastfeeding as soon as possible to restart my medications and treat my arthritis. But if you fast forward to my third pregnancy, the data has improved a lot by then. So I was advised at that point to stay on a pregnancy-safe biologic the entire time. I had almost no postpartum flare, and I was able to make my own choices about breastfeeding. So I think it's important to remember that, the data is always improving on which medications are safe. Lastly, I want to make one specific point about medications that no doctor ever told me. I learned about it later on. and that is that non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications, including over-the-counter medications like Advil or Aleve, those drugs can actually inhibit ovulation. So while it is super important to keep your inflammation under control, you need to make sure you're doing it in a fertility-friendly way if you're trying to conceive. I know that staying on a medication while pregnant can still be a really difficult decision. So, there are a couple of resources that I want to specifically point out so that you can learn more about the pros and cons. The first place I always send fellow patients with concerns about medications during pregnancy is Mother to Baby, which is a nonprofit that is the most trusted source of evidence based information on the benefit or risk of medication exposures. You can live chat with them, or you can call and speak to an expert who will answer your specific questions about your specific medications, and they'll do those answers with real data, and they can answer in English or in Spanish. They're also just really kind humans who understand what a complicated decision this can be. So, if you do end up staying on a medication while you're pregnant, I highly recommend joining one of Mother to Baby's observational studies so that you can help improve this data for the next woman down the line. I've done two of their studies myself. There's also a great resource from the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance that talks about how to consider the topic of medication during pregnancy in a little more detail. It's a resource that was written for patients by patients, and it's been reviewed by doctors. And I want to highlight an article with special pregnancy considerations if you have a lupus diagnosis. I also want to point out that not all rheumatologists are necessarily up to date on pregnancy data and the current recommendations, especially if they're used to ordinarily treating just older patients. You might want to ask your doctor if they're aware of the most recent data on your particular medication, or you might even want to bring them the data from the Mother to Baby website. The American College of Rheumatology also has official pregnancy guidelines that have been carefully developed by leading doctors in the field of reproductive rheumatology. So make sure your rheumatologist is aware of those guidelines as well. Lastly, if you don't feel like your rheumatologist has the most up to date information that you need to make an informed decision about medications during pregnancy, you should consider visiting a perinatologist or a maternal fetal medicine specialist, MFM. These doctors have specialty training in high risk pregnancies. And for me, even just talking with this doctor one time truly helped me better understand the data and make an informed decision for my own pregnancy. After talking to your doctor to come up with a medication plan, the next step is actually getting pregnant. When I was trying to get pregnant for the first time, I was so frustrated that the only resources that existed at the time, they skipped right from here's how to plan your pregnancy to here's what to do now that you're pregnant. But there's something kind of important that needs to happen between those two stages, right? For me, since I was told to stop taking all of my medications with my first pregnancy, my fatigue and pain were out of control. I really struggled to figure out how I was supposed to manage the physical act of sex at all. Since there's more medication safety data today, hopefully people trying to conceive will be in a better state than I was physically. But it's still not a secret that arthritis can make intimacy really challenging sometimes. Sex and arthritis is a whole separate topic, but I don't want to completely skip it because it is really important to this discussion. So, in the interest of time, I just want to provide this list of resources on intimacy with chronic illness. I'm also going to skip through the topic of being pregnant pretty quickly so that we still have time to talk about parenting. But here are some really great resources for managing pregnancy while still living with arthritis. Before we jump into talking about parenting more generally, I want to quickly touch on the topic of infant feeding. This is another topic that could be an entire talk all by itself, but it's probably the question that comes up most often when you consider what it's going to be like to bring home a newborn baby. First, I want to specifically state that fed is best. However, you feed your baby is ultimately your decision, and you should choose whatever method works the best for you and for your baby. But I also know from experience that there can be a lot of social pressure surrounding this question, and there can be a lot of emotion regarding what you have in mind and what you would like to do personally as well. So I wanted to be sure to mention this topic and to also share some resources so you can go more in depth into this topic if it's one that speaks to you. And now I want to spend the rest of my time talking about my best strategies for parenting while living with arthritis. My first strategy is to plan in advance wherever possible. And I know this might seem a little bit repetitive considering I already talked so much about planning during the pregnancy section. But to be perfectly honest, I think this advice is worth repeating because it can really be key to parenting well with arthritis. Obviously you can't plan for absolutely everything, especially when kids are involved. Sometimes it seems like my kids are deliberately throwing all of my plans right out the window. And so when you're a parent, you do have to have a certain degree of flexibility and adaptability. That's certain. But being a parent is both physically and mentally challenging for absolutely everyone. So it can be especially challenging for those of us who are living with the pain and fatigue of arthritis. And most of us know from experience that flares and infections and fatigue and weird joint pain, it can pop up and happen at really any time, really unexpectedly. So once you're a parent, guess what? Those kids are always there and you have to take care of them no matter how you feel. So the way I figure it is if I do some planning during the times where I feel a bit better or have a little bit more energy, I can make things a lot easier for myself later on if I end up needing to parent when I have more pain or less energy. So here are some ways that I personally plan in advance as a parent living with arthritis. My doctor and I find it useful to have some idea of what our next step is likely to be in case whatever we're currently doing stops working or isn't enough. This gives me a chance to think things through before I find myself in a flare, and then we can act quickly to activate the next step instead of trying to decide what to do when I'm already feeling miserable. This is a strategy I particularly recommend during pregnancy, especially if you want to try going med-free, and extra especially if you have another little kid to take care of while you're pregnant. There is some data to show that some percentage of women with diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, they do experience remission from their diseases while pregnant. And if you're one of those unicorn women, I'm so happy for you because it certainly did not happen for me. But trying to go med-free is a perfectly reasonable thing to try if you want to. But I want to emphasize that you should make sure you plan in advance for what you will do if you don't go into remission. I speak from experience here. My second pregnancy took place during a time when medications weren't recommended, except in cases of really extreme need. And I ended up flaring very badly during my second pregnancy. And I was forced to consider restarting medications in my third trimester while I was very large and very emotional. It would have been a lot more practical and a lot more pleasant if I had a plan in place in advance, just in case. The next thing I recommend doing to plan in advance is to make your home a place where it's easier for you to parent. Parenting is physically challenging and it is so repetitive. So you're going to be doing these tasks over and over and over and over again. So you can really help yourself out a lot by planning your living space specifically to suit your own needs. For example, when I brought my newborns home from the hospital, I made sure that I had lots of places through the house to safely put them down whenever I might need to, like bouncers and pack and plays. And I had various different types of carriers so that I could wear my babies to give my arms a break and my wrists a break. I also spent a long while considering the ergonomics of our changing table because I knew we would be changing diapers constantly. And here's one that you can learn from my mistake. With my firstborn, it took me months to figure out that I ought to have a changing station on each floor of my house so I didn't have to haul him up and down the stairs every single time he needed a clean diaper. So learn from me there. For older kids, I really recommend setting up a system of toy rotation. What this means is that at any given time, only a portion of the toys that we own are out in the playroom. I have the rest of the toys stored in a closet for weeks or even months at a time. The first thing this does is save a lot of energy on cleanup. It saves both physical energy when I'm picking stuff up by myself because there's just less stuff to pick up, and it also saves mental energy when I'm trying to get my kids to clean up because it's easier for them too. Toy rotation also gives me the option to rotate toys on days when I'm not feeling well. And so that means that the, quote unquote new toys that reappear after a few weeks hidden in the closet, they really keep my kids' attention for longer, and that gives me more time to rest. I also keep an art cart full of craft supplies that have a minimal mess factor, like coloring books, markers, crayons, stickers, stamps, activity books. My kids are now older and more independent, so I can direct them to these supplies when they need something to do and I need to take a break. So these are just some examples of how I prepare my home in advance to help with the task of parenting. These specific ideas might not work well for your family, But my point is that it's important to spend some time thinking about what would work best for your family and to try to prepare whatever that is a little bit during the times when you have a bit more energy. Lastly, I want to encourage you to focus on what you enjoy doing the most and to actually plan to do less. This seems simple enough, but I recognize that it's very often easier said than done, especially in today's busy society. To me, it seems like everyone else's kids and everyone else's families are doing so much. They have sports and lessons and clubs and volunteering and carpools and trips and tutors. It's completely overwhelming, especially for parents who have more limited energy. But here's the secret. It is completely okay to limit your family's activities to a level that you can achieve without placing more burden on your own health. It's 100% okay for your family to focus just on the activities that are most important and then to purposely leave some blank space in your calendar. In fact, since flares can happen so unexpectedly, scheduling downtime can leave you with room to take better care of yourself. And personally, I also think that kids need downtime. They need time to play, to read, even to be bored sometimes. I think it's good for them. But I do know from experience how easy it is to think, if I don't do all the activities that other kids are doing, my kids are going to fall behind. So, one thing that really helped me work through the sort of guilt of limiting my kids' activities is a book by Brene Brown called The Gifts of Imperfection. In this book, Brene gives 10 guideposts for what she calls wholehearted living, things to focus on and things to let go of. Guidepost 7 is to work on cultivating play and rest while letting go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth. This chapter in particular helped me feel totally at peace for making plans for my family in a way that works for us. The way we do it is that my kids each get to choose one extracurricular activity. Right now, my daughter takes a dance class and my sons take a ninja class. And so far, we haven't done any organized team sports. This keeps our schedule less hectic and it leaves our weekends free for nature adventures, which I personally find really important for my own mental health. Now, will I need to change my approach as my kids get older and more vocal about what activities they want to do? Yeah, probably I will. And that brings me right to my second strategy. So I just spent 15 minutes talking about how useful it can be to plan in advance. But that strategy comes with a really important caveat. A friend of mine who's also a mom living with RA, she said it best. She said, "It is always okay to change your mind about how you're parenting." As my friend pointed out, and I think she's completely right, most people tend to have this list in their mind of what they're going to do and what they're not going to do when they become a parent. I certainly had this list myself, and sometimes I like to go back and laugh at myself about all the things I thought I would do that I have not managed to do in that particular way. But I know that it isn't always funny. Sometimes these are things that you feel like are necessary to being a good parent. And it can be really tempting to try to stick to those things no matter what happens in reality. But it's so important to be open to changing your parenting technique as you manage your arthritis and as your kids grow, because there's always going to be new and different challenges. I think the advice, don't be afraid to change your mind, is good advice for any parent, but it's especially good for parents who are living with painful conditions like arthritis. Situations change, your physical abilities may change. Your kids are going to have their own opinions. They are going to have so many opinions. This means that even if you have a plan in place, it's always okay to reevaluate the situation and change your mind about how you are parenting. The most important thing is to find a plan that works for you and your family, even if that plan has to change over time. So I want to sum up my very best advice for parenting while living with arthritis, and it's this: plan in advance, but don't be afraid to change your mind. Lastly, I also just want to mention that taking care of yourself is taking care of your family. You are part of your family too. You are essential to how your family functions. And you know what your kids need? They need you. So I also think it's so important to model self-care for our kids. They need to see that their parents are humans too. They need to see that we have, needs of our own and that we have to put in time and effort to take care of our own health too. So please take care of yourself. Please don't be afraid to change your mind. And thanks so much for listening today. Always feel free to reach out to me if you have specific questions or you just want to chat with someone who, understands what it's like to be pregnant or parent while living with arthritis. Thanks.